Good morning. About an hour ago, I signed an agreement between the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the City of Minneapolis that charts a clear roadmap for change going forward in our Minneapolis Police Department. I've heard from a lot of people out there that are wondering what to make of this and how they should feel. Is this good for police? Is it bad for police? Is this good for reform, or is it bad for reform? Well, I'll tell you what, this is a good thing for the city of Minneapolis. This is a good thing for the city of Minneapolis. I won't tell you how to feel, but I'll tell you how I feel. I feel optimistic. The agreement isn't change in and of itself, but it charts a clear roadmap to it. And there's a whole lot of work that went into this agreement. 30 plus day-long negotiation sessions. It's 144 pages, 496 carefully crafted paragraphs, and none of us could have done this work alone. This work in all forms has stemmed from partnership. I want to give a huge thank you to our negotiating team, especially our city attorney's office, Kristen Anderson, Sarah Lathrop, Yvette McGee-Brown, Amelia Huffman. Thank you so much. I also want to give a huge thank you to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as well as Commissioner Lucero. Thank you so much. The partnership has been huge, and this is a roadmap, and it's a journey that we've already begun. This agreement helps us to embark on the work and then push it even further. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about all of the policy changes that we have already made, so I'm not going to talk about them. You can find them on the website. But in fact, we've made a ton of policy changes. But simply putting policy on a paper is not enough so that people actually feel that change on the ground. You've heard me talk about the dramatic shift that we've made to our entire government structure, creating an Office of Community Safety, providing a comprehensive and integrated approach. This is part of the safety service that we want people to feel throughout our city, in every neighborhood, and on every single block. But here's how this agreement helps. It's an opportunity to transition from the what that is prescribed on the paper to the how. How, in fact, are we going to get this done? As I've said, we've done a lot of policy, but the words on the page aren't enough. We want to make sure we first have that policy in place. Second, we want to make sure that officers know specifically what they're supposed to do and how to follow that policy. Third, they need to be trained in on that policy to the point where it's muscle memory. And then finally, officers need to be held accountable when they aren't living up to the standards that we are insisting on as a collective community. A good deal of the policy language that you'll see in this agreement you've probably seen before. The big part in this is that it takes us further, embedding this policy in practice. Indeed, this agreement helps to ensure that the policy itself meets the road, it meets the ground, that neighbors and officers alike feel that change, and I can assure you that both neighbors and officers want to be part of that change. The agreement also serves several opportunities. The first opportunity is that it takes the sting of politics out of the equation. Inevitably, we'll still have disagreements going forward here at City Hall. Many of those disagreements, however, are ironed out and are ironclad in the agreement itself. For example, an early intervention system. There will no longer be a dispute either way about whether we should have one. We need to have an early intervention system. It needs to be set up. There are clear parameters on how to do so, and we've got deadlines ultimately that we have to meet. Funding. Change and improvement is going to take time and is going to take resources. Other cities that have entered any form of agreement have seen pretty significant expense. I will tell you that that expense will be worth it. Second, it establishes a clear criteria for that change. To be clear, we didn't get here overnight, and change also won't happen overnight. This problem that we now face, it has taken hold over many generations, many administrations, mayors, and chiefs, and clearly our black and brown communities have taken the brunt of this. So we're not asking for patience here. We are asking you to stick with us, and I'm talking to everybody. We're asking you to stick with us through thick and thin. There will be moments when some will say that this agreement needs to be pushed aside. I'm asking you to hold with this and hold us to it. I'm asking you that when we are faced with a violent weekend or shootings take place, that should not result in a call for this agreement to be undone in its entirety. Officers will make mistakes. Mistakes themselves shouldn't be a call for the agreement to be undone. We need to make sure we're sticking with the plan, that we're working together, and that we are doing everything that we can in our power to chart that course for change. Third, this is an opportunity for us to show our work. Our community in this case, in all cases, deserves transparency, and they're going to have it. We're going to have a public website that is up. You're going to be able to track that data for yourself. There's going to be regular reviews, regular audits. There'll be tracking mechanisms that are set up. And those mechanisms will be set across a number of different areas, from regular reviews, audits, stops, searches, arrests, and then training. There's going to be peer reviews, supervisor reviews, importantly, reviews by MPD leadership. This is going to be a whole lot of accountability that's baked in. And by the way, all of these areas are going to be evaluated, not just internally, but by an independent evaluator. Provisions within this agreement will also allow us to track real-time some of these data that we see and make informed decisions based on it. And oftentimes we get sucked into the numbers and what the data means and what the data tells us, but then the way that data meets an interaction between a police officer and somebody in your neighborhood, people don't necessarily feel it. Behind every single one of those numbers is an interaction. Behind every single one of those numbers that we are going to be using to make decisions is a way to improve trust between our officers and the communities that they are charged with protecting and serving. So data won't just be numbers in a vacuum. They're going to be felt in every interaction. We'll also be tracking more complete set of specifics around FTO reviews, field training officer reviews. I'll tell you, this is critical. This is how our field training officers themselves are training in officers after they've already entered the department, after they've completed the academy. This area in particular is huge for changing the culture itself, and we all know that we need to change the culture. We're also going to be insisting on accountability for everyone, for our officers, for our neighbors. And one thing I know for certain here is that officers that have stuck around, especially over these last few years through a whole lot of difficulty, they are in fact really committed to this change. Officers that will be joining our Minneapolis Police Department want to be part of this new era, and we want to welcome them in to be part of it with us. They're here for the right reasons. They're here to protect and serve our communities, and we want to make sure that they have the right supports in getting there. This is not leaving them high and dry with an agreement in place with a bunch of provisions on the page and then they have to do the rest. We want to make sure that they are supported through this accountability measure. We want to make sure that they're supported in doing the work that we know we all need to get done. And so we're going to do a comprehensive needs assessment of our existing support services, of wellness for officers, of our technology, of our facilities, and more. And depending on what that assessment shows, we're going to invest. We're going to provide resources to our police department to make sure they have what they need to be safe, to keep us safe, to keep them healthy, and to make sure that they are their best at work, that they're able to recalibrate between some of these very stressful calls, and that they're able to be their best versions of self. That is a huge part of it. Holding them accountable, critical. Also giving them the resources that they need to succeed, also critical. The city will provide a range of licensed mental health support services, including readily accessible, confidential counseling and stress management, officer wellness training. We're going to make sure that we're providing post-traumatic stress disorder service as well, and care, domestic violence, alcohol and substance abuse, anger management, and so on. We'll also ensure that these services are actually culturally specific, and that any officer who requests that kind of emergency counseling and service will receive it within 24 hours. You'll see a lot of paragraphs in a very long document before you. As I've mentioned, it took a lot of work to get to this point. But knowing that we've got a committed force, a committed commissioner, committed chief, council members, knowing that we have an entire enterprise that is behind being this change and making the difference, and that we've got a partner in the Minnesota Department of Human Rights to make sure we're checking off the boxes as we hit them, that will be critical. This is indeed a roadmap for change, and we have the opportunity to be on the cutting edge and to be an example, hopefully, that others will follow. So the world is watching us, and I know that Minneapolis will be held as an example for policing. We're ready for that. We need to lean into it, and we're committed to doing this work together. As I mentioned, all this work has stemmed through agreement and partnership, recognizing the wrongs of the past and charting a clear roadmap for the future. In doing so, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights has been a critical component and partner in that. Heading it up is the Commissioner, Rebecca Lucero. Commissioner.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Lucero, and I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Human Rights, the state civil rights enforcement agency. I guess I want to go a little bit off script from what I intended to start with, and actually just talk a little bit about George Floyd. He was murdered 1,040 days ago. It's been a very long time to get to this point where he should be alive still. We launched an investigation against the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Police Department because it is unlawful for a city or a police department to discriminate against a class of people because of their race. And when our department finds civil rights violations, we seek structural transformational change. So today we have entered into this court-enforceable agreement. This is a legally binding agreement. It requires the city and MPD to make transformational changes. And importantly, everything is tied to and centered around organizational culture. It's tied to and centered around recognizing the humanity, recognizing the civil rights of community members, addressing race-based policing, and strengthening public safety. I want to start by thanking all of the community members who have been working on this for years, decades, generations. They've been through a lot of partnership with the city. They've done a lot of work on the ground, and it is because of their work that we build off of, it is their work that we build off of throughout this. I'll talk about what we heard from community members and also from officers, but I just want to say that this agreement incorporates wholesale what we heard from community members and police officers all over. I, of course, want to also thank Mayor Frey, the Minneapolis Police Department, the City Attorney's Office, City Council President Jenkins, and City Council for their cooperation, their creativity, and their leadership throughout this process. I am grateful for the commitment to the hard work ahead. Minneapolis community members deserve to be treated with humanity, and this provides the framework, as the mayor said, the framework for lawful, non-discriminatory policing. It reduces unnecessary dangers for officers, and across the board results in better public safety for Minneapolis. So it was a little bit under a year ago, on April 27th, 2022, that I came before you to announce that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights found the city and MPD engage in a pattern or practice of race-based policing. That discrimination is in violation of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The investigation found that this pattern of race discrimination is primarily caused by organizational culture of flawed trainings, deficient accountability systems, and a lack of collective, sustained action by city and MPD leaders to change this organizational culture over many years, decades even. The findings emphasize that without fundamental organizational culture change, reforming the policies, procedures, and trainings will be meaningless. And so again, everything is centered around organizational culture change. When I met with you in April of last year, I told you we can change this, that we can choose different. And today, we are doing just that. This court-enforceable agreement sets a path towards a more just future for people of color, Indigenous community members in Minneapolis, and it will address race-based policing and improve public safety. There are 3 critical pieces for you to know about in this agreement. So first off, there's been work that's been done over the years. And so I want to be clear how this is different, because this is different than anything the city has ever done to strengthen public safety. This is a court-enforceable agreement, which is a powerful tool for change. We get asked a lot by many of you, what is a court-enforceable agreement? A court-enforceable agreement goes by a variety of names. It is a legal document. It is submitted to the court. It is submitted after the parties have reached a settlement, and once approved by the court, the agreement is legally binding and enforceable through ongoing oversight by the court. What does this mean? What does this mean in practice? It means that the city cannot walk away from this agreement. It is only the court who can and will end this agreement after the city reaches full, effective, and sustained compliance with the terms of this agreement. Unlike any previous effort to improve public safety in Minneapolis, and with the goal of making sure that Minneapolis can be successful in this work, this agreement incorporates independent oversight through an independent evaluation team who will support the city and MPD, monitor their progress, and provide regular public reports. The second thing that you need to know is that this is a long and challenging path forward. Changing a culture does not happen overnight, does not happen over a couple years, and this court-enforceable agreement sets the city and MPD on a productive path forward. It provides clear timelines, it provides prioritizations, and it lays out all the work that's ahead. Some of these changes can be and have been made now. The city has made many of these changes since we announced the findings. And with the priority around culture change, this takes a long time. So some of the cities that are working through this type of agreement, it takes more than a decade. I think we just saw this week the U.S. Department of Justice moving to end its consent decree with the Seattle Police Department after 10 years. I don't know how long this will last in Minneapolis, and I want to set reasonable expectations for the long path ahead. Real and lasting organizational culture change cannot and will not happen fast. It will require an unbelievable amount of dedicated, focused, sustained work. The third thing that you should know that is critical about this agreement is that from day one of launching the investigation, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights prioritized meeting with both community members and officers. We did that because we recognized the knowledge and the work that had come before us, and we wanted to make sure we were incorporating and honoring all that we could. We did that work during the investigation and again after we announced our findings. We said, let's go back and get feedback from the 2 groups who are most impacted by MPD policies. That's both community members and police officers, and that is what we did. So in partnership with the Minnesota Justice Research Center, we hosted 15 community events last summer. Many of them were attended by city council members, by lots of community members, and this was just in addition to the ongoing conversations I had with many community organizations and community leaders. Humanity, that was the first thing that we heard over and over again. Community members shared that they want MPD to move away from a culture of violence to a culture that prioritizes humanity. This includes clear policies that prioritize de-escalation. I had the privilege of checking in with Buddy Locke this morning, Amir Locke's father. He asks frequently if there had been a sense of humanity around Amir. If he had been given that opportunity to have his humanity seen, would he still be alive right now? I thank Mr. Locke for his work getting to this point in this agreement. The second thing we hear from community members is around accountability. Community members shared that they want strong systems in place for accountability, which is essential to transparency and essential to building trust. When it comes to listening to police officers, we obviously did that extensively through the investigation. And then after we announced the findings, we worked with 21 CP Solutions to hold 15 listening sessions last summer at every precinct with officers of different rank and different assignments. Officers shared repeatedly that they need policies to be clear, that long and confusing policies do not set them up for success. Officers also shared that they want to be trained on those clear policies with practice, with hands-on training, with adult learning principles, and that needs to occur before the policies go into place. So again, both community members and officers can be set up for success. And officers shared that they need better support. That includes everything from comprehensive health and wellness programs to having a technology systems that interface, that talk to each other. So for community members and officers listening, this means that this court-enforceable agreement contains many provisions that are based on what you shared. Really want to thank you for your time and input with us throughout this process. So what is in this legally binding agreement? I'm just going to go over a few quick points here. It requires the city and MPD to make transformational changes. Importantly, every provision in this agreement was agreed to by the city, by MPD, and by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So let's start with clear, effective policies, because as we heard, clear, effective policies build community trust, provide non-discriminatory policing, and reduce dangers for officers. In our findings, you may recall that MDHR found that MPD officers use higher rates of more severe force against Black individuals compared to white individuals in similar circumstances, so apples to apples situations here. So to make sure that force is used only when it is objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional, the city and MPD must require officers to de-escalate, prohibit officers from using force to punish or retaliate, limit when officers can use force, limit when and how officers can use chemical irritants and tasers, and ban excited delirium training. In our findings, the Department of Human Rights found that even when comparing similar traffic stops, again, that apples to apples comparison, MPD officers searched Black community members or their vehicles during traffic stops almost 2 times more often compared to white individuals, again, in those similar situations. And the alleged smell of cannabis or marijuana is a justification relied on to complete a search of people of color. That's why the first set, these additional sets of clear, effective policies include prohibiting the use of certain pretext stops, banning searches based on alleged smells of cannabis or marijuana, and prohibiting so-called consent searches during pedestrian or vehicle stops. I want to make sure I'm making an important note here. The court-enforceable agreement does not prohibit officers from relying on reasonable, articulatable suspicion or probable cause of criminal activity to enforce the law. We want officers to do their jobs. We want them to be successful and do them well, and that means policing in a non-discriminatory manner. So the second bucket is where the court-enforceable agreement prioritizes organizational culture change. Many of these items, you recall, MPD officers said were particularly important to them. First, quality training and support. It's important that MPD officers understand and follow policies. That's why the city and MPD are required to provide quality, timely training. They must also provide officers with a range of support services, and that includes meaningful mental health support and well-functioning early intervention system, all things officers and community members all said were essential. Next is meaningful engagement. While MPD is developing and updating its policies, they are required to actually work with and engage and collect feedback from the people who are most impacted by MPD's policies. Again, community members and police officers. This helps build relationships, it creates buy-in, and it develops a continuous feedback loop of learning. The agreement also requires the city and MPD develop robust and well-functioning accountability and oversight systems, so MPD officers are held to the highest standards of integrity. It requires that the Office of Police Conduct and the Office of Internal Affairs conduct quality and timely police misconduct investigations, and they have to happen separate from each other without inappropriate influence, which is something we talked about quite a bit in our findings. Lastly, there's robust data collection and transparency. We know that data-driven decision-making supports a culture of accountability and transparency. That's why the agreement requires the city and MPD to strengthen its data collection mechanisms, something Officer said was super important, produce an annual use of force report, something that community members wanted to have transparency around, create a public database of discipline records that is searchable by precinct, by name and date. And one that I'm particularly excited about as well is to establish an MPD review panel that exists to create the systems and structures for critical reflection, for process improvement, and for continuous learning, because this is a never-ending process to work on culture. You will find up on our website, of course, the full agreement, summaries, one-pagers. You'll see a diagram that shows you how all of these pieces connect and come together around organizational change, of continuous learning, of humanity, and civil rights. When I announced this investigation on June 2nd, 2020, I said, all of us are called to do everything we can, not just to prevent future deaths, but to end the systemic racism that is leading to these outcomes. I ended by affirming that we are deeply interconnected, that we need each other. So again, I'm thrilled that Mayor Frey, Commissioner Alexander, Chief O'Hara, Council President Jenkins, and the entire City Council have pledged their deep support of this legally binding, court-enforceable agreement. It is going to take all of us, city and state government, yes, but also foundations, businesses, community members, all of us, to tackle the structural, transformational shifts that must happen for lasting change to occur. This agreement serves as a model for how cities, police departments, and community members across the country can work together to address race-based policing and strengthen public safety. This is a model for a new path forward. So it has been 1,040 days since an MPD officer murdered George Floyd. I started by talking about how Mr. Floyd should be alive today. It is with the deep awareness that Mr. Floyd should be alive today that I'm going to end my statement again today, just like I did last time I talked to you, by affirming that we are deeply interconnected, that we need each other. And so I look forward to the work ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Indeed, George Floyd should be alive today. With that, I will bring up our Council President, Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. Thank you, Commissioner Lucero. My name is Andrea Jenkins. I'm the president of the Minneapolis City Council. I just want to start by stating that this settlement represents a roadmap for greater accountability, transparency, better training, and police officer wellness. We've begun the work to implement changes in conjunction with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights findings and to restructure our Office of Community Safety and how we respond to public safety issues. But we have a lot of work ahead of us. I want to start by thanking city leaders, including Mayor Frey, my city council colleagues, some of whom are here with us today, council members Vital and Council Vice President Palmisano. I want to thank Commissioner Lucero, Chief O'Hara, the City Attorney's Office, and all City of Minneapolis staff for their collaboration, engagement, and commitment to this agreement, this court-enforceable agreement, and the commitment to the work ahead. Today is about community, especially our Black and brown communities, and how we're going to better serve them. Today is about how we're going to build a more transparent, more accountable, and more equitable police department. While much of the work to date has been technical and legal in nature, our community has remained a priority throughout this entire process. And as we have been reminded by Commissioner Lucero, this work was initiated by the death, the murder of George Floyd, but not only George Floyd, but by so many other community members that should be alive and here with us today. We understand that this agreement will impact every facet of our community. And that's why it's important that we're not just doing this work for you, but we're doing this work with you. We need the community to be engaged in this process. But in order for this to happen, transparency and accountability are required. The City Council, the Mayor, and MPD have been working hard to ensure that these values are embedded not just in our words, but in our actions. As we move forward, you will continue to see this important work continue. In the next few months, the city will be creating a public web page, in addition to the web page that Commissioner Lucero talked about, to receive comments from community members surrounding the MPD's policies and practices. This will also offer a chance for residents to share their thoughts on what is going well and what they'd like to see improved. The city will be holding public engagement sessions to discuss the police department's goals, visions, values, and policies, and to get feedback from our residents on how to best continue collaborating and moving this work forward. As policies are revised at MPD, you will know. I'm proud to say that myself and Councilmember Ellison co-chair the Patterns and Practices Subcommittee, and that we will have frequent and robust public hearings so that we can get updates from the police department, MPD, as well as the independent evaluator, to make sure that we are keeping the public informed on the policy changes and updates as they occur. Our community will be involved in the selection of an independent evaluator who will oversee this agreement and will be invited to public sessions to learn more about the finalists for this position. Lastly, but certainly not least, I'm really proud that we have created a community commission on police oversight to improve transparency and accountability. As has been reported in the news, we've had record-breaking number of applications for this commission. 160 people have stepped forward to be a part of this work. This overwhelming response indicates that people are eager for meaningful and community-led oversight of our police. We know that this work is going to take time, but it doesn't mean that we aren't committed to it, because we recognize how important this work is for our community and the police department. I'll end by saying this. I know how much trauma and pain the last 3 years have had on this entire community, but especially our Black and brown communities. I want you to know that we see you, we hear you, and we are committed to making the meaningful changes that will create the safety, the trust, the accountability, and the humanity that our communities deserve. I hope that you will show up to work with us as we move forward towards change, and that includes showing up to community sessions to have your voices heard. Before I introduce my colleague and Council Vice President, I do want to acknowledge that March 31st is International Transgender Day of Visibility. And I say that because when we honor and recognize the most vulnerable people in our communities, everybody benefits. That's what this agreement is doing, and that's the work that I commit to doing each and every day. Without any further ado, I want to introduce my colleague and friend, Council Vice President Lene Palmisano. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President, for your leadership on establishing our Community Commission on Police Oversight that is a part of this MDHR agreement. I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we step into this work. While today's agreement is a milestone, it's going to be one of many, and I'm really eager to get started. Much of it reflects work we've been doing in other ways, and here are a couple things I've focused on over the years and how they are reflected in this agreement. I want to highlight data, field training officers, and wellness within our police force. From a data perspective, this agreement puts forward a roadmap for how we build that change effectively and more completely than we have ever resourced before. We're establishing clear targets for improvement and timelines to review and audit all city systems that impact law enforcement services. While data might not sound like a glamorous word, it is a really critical one. We'll be making improvements that will impact how our police department tracks and records information, and that impacts how information gets shared with the community. It will require significant investment in new IT infrastructure, including new data collection, management, analysis systems. And this is how residents will track our work, and this is how the public can hold us accountable. In terms of field training of officers, in the past, the model for preparing our officers for field work was lacking. The Field Training Officer FTO position was a part-time role that relied on volunteers and self-selection, and that led to inconsistent training. The minimum standards for an FTO weren't clear, and they lacked clarity on who should not be an FTO. It lacked transparency for our trainees and what they should expect to be provided to them. In short, the whole program lacked transparency and firm expectations. Since our audit in 2021, which revealed these deficiencies, we've been working to address our shortcomings. And for over a year, we've worked to instill the clarity and expectations that this program needs and is essential. Clarity on what our trainees should expect, what our FTOs should expect, and what the public should expect when we train our officers. Moving forward, we will be documenting every step of a trainee's time in this program. We will better identify opportunities for improvement early and often. Our officers will receive the best supports possible for achieving field readiness status. Another important part of the work we're going to continue doing, and others have mentioned this going forward, is providing full comprehensive support for officer wellness. We know that mental health is health, and it's crucial that our police officers have the support and resources they need to be able to do their jobs effectively and efficiently. With this agreement, we are expanding how we provide treatment and preventive services to our officers so they can bring their best selves to this job. When our officers are taken care of, it allows them to be able to better take care of our community. We will be providing access to a full spectrum of licensed mental health support services, a comprehensive annual wellness plan, and regular audits so we are ensuring our officers' needs are being met. Over the last 3 years, we've talked a lot about how we're going to shift the culture of MPD. Building a city that supports one another and provides this kind of care that addresses the trauma that officers experience is one way to start that shift. I'll now turn it over to our City Attorney, Kristen Anderson.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Anderson, City Attorney of the City of Minneapolis. As a resident of Minneapolis, I have a vested interest in ensuring that our city is committed to building community trust in non-discriminatory constitutional policing. Knowing that these reform efforts were underway was a huge reason why I took this job just 6 months ago. Literally on day 2 as city attorney, I was in an all-day negotiation session with my former colleagues from the state. Throughout all of these negotiation sessions, and there were more than 30, both parties have been at the table in good faith and have worked together tirelessly to come to, the court-enforceable settlement agreement that we have today. So if you don't mind me getting a little legal and technical on you, folks have asked, why do we call this thing a court-enforceable settlement agreement instead of a consent decree? Number one, it's actually titled settlement agreement, But we were really, really intentional using this term way back in July of 2022 in our joint statement of principles to differentiate for the public for clarity about what's going on with the state human rights department versus what's expected to come with the Department of Justice. You've heard the term consent decree, and that term is most often used with respect to the U.S. Department of Justice's police pattern and practice agreements with cities. In that joint statement of principles, MDHR and the city intentionally used the term consent decree to describe what may occur in the future between the city and the U.S. Department of Justice. And in contrast, we use the term court-enforceable settlement agreement to describe what MDHR and the city would negotiate to resolve MDHR's findings. In that joint statement, we were also very intentional to account for any interaction that would occur between this MDHR settlement agreement and a potential future Department of Justice consent decree with really two important things. Number one, and these are reflected in the settlement agreement itself, number one, that if we wind up in a consent decree with the Department of Justice, MDHR and the city have agreed that we will come together and modify the settlement agreement if necessary so there are no conflicts between a DOJ consent decree and the MDHR settlement agreement so that we're not coming and going at the same time. And then the second really important point is that there will only be one individual or entity to evaluate compliance with both agreements, one monitor. Continuing to be a little on the legal side, I wanted to talk today a little bit about what the process will be now that we have a approved settlement agreement. Later today, or maybe it's already been done, Human Rights will file a new lawsuit against the city in Hennepin County District Court, and at the same time file the court-enforceable settlement agreement and a joint motion between the city and the Human Rights Department asking the court to issue the settlement agreement as a court order. This lawsuit is simply a necessary part of the process for the settlement agreement to be approved by the court, making it that court-enforceable agreement that we have been all talking about, as agreed way back in July in the joint statement of principles. There are no new allegations in the lawsuit. It contains allegations based on MDHR's investigation and probable cause determination from April of 2022. So all of these documents will be filed in court, and then it's in the court's hands for the court to determine what process the court wants to use and for the court then ultimately to approve the agreement. As others have said, compliance with this court-enforceable settlement agreement will be a huge undertaking. Cities from around the country have told us that this is an iterative process and it will take years to accomplish to get it right. But we need a clear goal that we are all working towards. What this settlement agreement provides is a roadmap to change not just for this mayor and this city council, but for every mayor and every city council and frankly every employee who works on public safety to be committed to and to be accountable for to this independent evaluator, but more importantly to our community. I'd like to call up next Commissioner Cedric Alexander.
Thank you and good morning. The Office of Community Safety was formed roughly about 8 months ago to enhance and unify the daily operations, preparation, and strategic priorities of 911 services, emergency management, fire, police, and of course our neighborhood safety departments. The City of Minneapolis must have these 5 departments functioning efficiently and effectively daily to ensure the safety of our residents in the preparation and execution for day-to-day as well, if should any crisis arise. I want to acknowledge that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights has spent significant time reviewing, evaluating, and recommending significant changes to how the City of Minneapolis builds relationships between public safety and community. Some people may view this deep dive into our city policies, protocols, practices as just another negative interpretation of Minneapolis' shortcoming or failures in the aftermath in the murder of George Floyd. I see MDHR's work in this settlement agreement as a difficult yet necessary step in the right direction to further enhance the trust and legitimacy between police and community. OCS is developing a comprehensive, coordinated approach to community safety. Our police department is an integral part of this structure. We will work together tirelessly to keep our residents safe in an equitable and constitutional manner. The settlement agreement highlights many institutional reforms, some new and several already underway. We know that we have a dedicated team of professional public safety personnel willing to continue the daily work while remaining open-minded and motivated to make changes for the better. OCS unified efforts are already paying dividends, but we know that we have a lot of work yet to do. We must have first responders and law enforcement, specifically, the necessary resources and support to the best serve and protect our residents. Capacity continues to remain a crucial issue for us in our city. Our leadership is committed to building capacity, developing best practices, and creating appropriate systems to ensure that the city becomes a model for others to follow across the nation. The city of Minneapolis is committed to becoming an innovator, an industry leader in community safety. OCS will lead this work in transforming Minneapolis into one of the safest cities in America for everyone in this community. Thank you very much. And I'm going to introduce now Chief Brian O'Hara. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. On behalf of the Minneapolis Police, we recognize that some terrible things have happened here in the past. And together with our communities, we are embracing this reform process today. This settlement agreement envisions substantial reforms that must be fully implemented and practiced to perfection by all members of the MPD at all times. And then we must be able to prove that we have done so to an independent evaluator. So this agreement will ensure that Minneapolis Police will have the policies, training, support, and resources that they need to deliver the highest quality of policing services that our residents deserve. But we will not be confined to the four corners of this document. We will continue to work tirelessly to ensure that the culture of policing in this town, as well as the narrative around policing and public safety, continues to change so that all residents of Minneapolis can know that Minneapolis cops have their backs. At the same time, we recognize that those who are most affected by policing itself are often those who are most vulnerable to crime and violence. Our most vulnerable communities should know that we will continue to respond. We will continue to answer the call. We will continue to protect and serve day and night and do everything in our power to keep all people safe. This is a continuation of a long process to heal the deep wounds of this city. Immediately after the council voted this morning, I called retired Police Chief Medaria Arredondo to make sure he was aware of this moment. And I just want to publicly acknowledge and thank him for his service to this city, as well as to the service and the leadership of the interim police chief, Amelia Huffman. At the same time, we know the hard work is just beginning. But I believe at the end of this process, Minneapolis will have the best police department in the nation. Our city will be safer. And the police and all communities of this city will be more united than ever before. Thank you. Mayor.
So I think it's clear that the murder of George Floyd was the final straw that led to this investigation, but this investigation, as has been stated repeatedly, is about a pattern practice over more than a decade. And that's why this work of embedding that culture change is so essential. Not just words on a paper, but making sure that every interaction has changed and that we are doing right specifically by our Black and brown communities. And with that, I'll open it up to questions and or pass it off to others.
Yeah. Mayor Frey, can you and Commissioner Lucero both address these covert social media accounts, which are mentioned but only briefly in the agreement? Have you, I know there's dispute over this in negotiations, can you guys just say clearly, do you both agree that the allegations as they appeared in the original charge were accurate?
I'll first pass it off to Kristen Anderson, our city attorney, and then of course Commissioner Lucero can answer as well, so we get that on the record.
I mean, the short answer is the city does not agree with those findings. We don't have to agree with everything with the Human Rights Department to come to a settlement agreement. I will note that in the 496 paragraph settlement agreement, it addresses covert social media or undercover social media in one paragraph and in a definition. And what it says is that the parties recognize the value of MPD using those accounts in a non-discriminatory manner to establish a credible undercover social media profile, and that we will continue to maintain a policy and will develop procedures. I also want to point out that Human Rights has on their FAQ website, I think, a very helpful question and answer. What did MDHR mean when it found that, quote, MPD's covert social media accounts were used to conduct surveillance? And the answer is, with respect to MDHR's findings about MPD's covert social media use, when MDHR described MPD as, quote, surveilling individuals and groups through social media, MDHR did not use that term to indicate, quote, hacking into accounts or private messaging systems or, quote, wiretapping those individuals or groups. What was meant by, quote, surveillance was that MPD officers use covert social media accounts to, quote, follow and, quote, engage with individuals and groups through their social media accounts. It is common practice for law enforcement agencies to, quote, follow and, quote, engage with individuals and groups through their social media accounts to establish a credible undercover social media profile.
And before we go to Commissioner Lucero, will you release the underlying documents so we can tell our readers and viewers whether or not the city was covertly, following people on social media, people of color, not white people, not white supremacists, and for no, criminal investigatory reason? That's what I'm talking about, not the definition of the word surveillance.
Okay, so the Data Practices Act obviously covers all of the data with respect to the investigation. At this point, all of the data with respect to MDHR's investigation is covered under Minnesota Statute Section 13.39, which is civil investigatory data, which is non-public at this point.
So you can't release it, or you
Correct.
won't release it?
Correct, we cannot release it. It's not public.
Hi, good morning. Just to correct it for the record, my name is Rebecca Lucero, or Rebecca Lucero, if that might be helpful. I think to address your specific question, our findings are correct. MPD uses covert social media to target black leaders, black organizations, and elected officials without a public safety objective. That remains true. The only clarity we provided was that when we said surveil, we meant exactly what we said in our findings, that they were using fake accounts to access community members and organizations to seek and gain access. We can call it, we don't have to use the word surveil if there's confusion about that. We agree it does not mean wiretapping. So we do agree that it means to track, follow, engage with. At the end of the day, we don't have to agree. That's what matters. And the policy change in here covers every single piece from top to bottom that must implement really good policies around undercover social media or covert social media accounts. And that's what we made sure to get into this agreement. I can ask Deputy Commissioner Irina Vanderman to come up and provide some more specifics on the legal pieces of it.
Hello, everyone. Irina Vanderman. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. As Commissioner Lucero just shared, the agreement itself contains, it's true, one paragraph and one definition pertaining to the use of undercover social media accounts. And that one paragraph addresses in full substance the concerns and findings that MDHR had with respect to the use of those undercover social media accounts. They can only be used as defined and provided in the definition for furthering criminal investigations. They have to be used in a lawful, non-discriminatory manner. And of course, there has to be authorization for such accounts to be created, tracking regular supervisory review and review holistically by the MPD review panel that Commissioner Lucero spoke about before with respect to how those accounts are being used to ensure that there's not a discriminatory outcome. If there's any other questions, happy to answer that.
I think it's not worth our time to go back and forth on this piece. I think what matters is that we do the work, and that is what we're all committed to doing. We've got to get to work to make sure there are good policies, good training, good procedures in place, and that is what the agreement lays out in detail throughout.
Why is the city not committing wrongdoing in the agreement?
So just back to the social media matter, again, the city disputes those findings. That the evidence that was presented to us, I just don't think shows what MDHR thinks that it shows. But we'll just dispute that. And to that question, the legal agreement, again, we don't have to admit to all findings. And in fact, it's a typical term of a settlement agreement that there is not an admission of liability. We can come to an agreement as mutual parties to a negotiation because we want to resolve these legal claims. We want closure on the dispute. We want closure on the idea of potential taxpayer-funded litigation when we know we've got work to do. And as I said at the council meeting today, this work, it's already started, but this really gives us a roadmap to really start this work in great earnest with a huge amount of accountability through that independent evaluator, and that's really what we're aiming towards. Not disputing all of these different points, but really coming together to make positive change for the community.
Paul Bloom, Fox 9, Chief O'Hara. Can I get a question with you, please? Talk to me about training this out. Obviously, we know work's been done, since Floyd over the last couple of years, but some big changes. Traffic stop search, marijuana, broken taillights, FTO. What's next week look like? I mean, do we have to redo training? How long will this take to get this department, your team right now, up to the standards of this agreement?
Yeah. So, I mean, directly, next week does not look much different than today. This is not something that the city has gotten into overnight, and we're not going to get out of this completely overnight. However, much of what is in the agreement had already been adopted by policy. And I think, as had been highlighted before in some of the feedback that police officers gave during this investigation, is officers are simply looking for clarity, right? And as there had been an urgent need to make reforms, I think to some degree officers felt somewhat overwhelmed by the length of policies and so on. So I think what this agreement will help is it will help ensure both that community has input and has their fingerprints on our policies, but also that our cops have a voice as well, that we get good feedback from our officers as far as what they understand and what they don't, and that when changes actually happen, we will be given the space now to ensure that there is, adult-based learning, scenario-based learning to ensure that officers are able to react on the spur of the moment. And a lot of times, quite frankly, police officers on the street are making decisions that sometimes it takes attorneys weeks to figure out what is the appropriate charge and that sort of thing. So I think this is something that as this goes on, as we move forward, as we're able to implement new policy, as we're able to implement new training, I think this will be something that will be more and more embraced by our officers. It also addresses officer wellness issues, as well as having a review of facilities, both police facilities and facilities that are available for training. So I think there's a lot in this agreement that will help provide the support and direction that police officers want.
Have the officers have they been given a copy of the agreement today?
No, the agreement has been confidential until this point. So as we move forward now, my plan is to train first the command staff and the supervisors so that they have a better understanding of that, and then we'll filter it down, throughout the entire agency.
Is the city any safer because of this agreement, in your opinion?
The city is safer today than it was at this point last year. Right? We've already had more than 36 fewer victims of gun violence this year. And ultimately, You know, the city is dealing with a serious level of crime and violence that's absolutely unacceptable. And the only way to reduce crime and sustain those reductions is to ensure that we are building trust with our community. We need people to be able to trust us, to tell us what's going on and where we might need to be. We need the community to inform our practices. So absolutely, at the end of this, as we go through this process each year, I believe the city will be safer each year, as well as I think more and more residents will say they trust Minneapolis cops and they have had more positive interactions with our officers.
One of the findings in this report was that officers routinely used racist, sexist, hateful language against residents, against suspects, against witnesses, which was already against policy. How is this report actually, or how is this agreement going to actually change that practically?
I think there's a lot that has happened and that is not unique to Minneapolis, that police departments do have policies that force must be lawful and so on, and still terrible things happen in policing. I think the difference is when you have this type of an agreement is you have a mandate to make certain investments that cities just do not make, because this is a very expensive process. It's very manpower intensive. And ultimately, you have to prove to near perfection to an independent evaluator, an independent monitor, that your cops are actually carrying this out. So I think the difference here is not the quality of what's written in documents, it's actually proving what happens on the street.
So we're going to see officers being disciplined for, say, cussing out, residents?
That is already a part of the disciplinary process, and through the implementation, the widespread implementation of body cameras, that becomes much easier to do. In the past, without cameras in policing, it becomes a he said, she said type scenario. But I think with the widespread implementation of body cameras, that type of issue is the most common complaint citizens have, and that's something that's easy to prove it happened or it didn't.
So we will see disciplines?
You will see discipline, but the ultimate goal of this process is to have fewer complaints against police, have fewer lawsuits filed for police brutality, have fewer payouts for police brutality. The actual goal, this isn't about a checklist of paragraphs to say, we did this and we're done, we did that and we're done. This is about making change real. It's about changing the culture of policing.
Mayor, Eric Rasmussen, KSTP. Obviously, the original Department of Human Rights report was critical of the conduct of some officers. It also shared that criticism all the way up through leadership, including mayors, plural. What will you do differently going forward from this point?
The agreement is obviously heavily focused on compliance, but really compliance should be more of a lever to both safety and justice. I don't think there's a mayor in the entire country that doesn't wish that they had enacted reforms and changes faster, and absolutely count me in with them. As you stated, this is an agreement this is an investigation that goes back through at least 3 administrations, several different chiefs, several different individuals, obviously, within the administration and the police department. It is a pattern and practice. We didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. And so the work is really ongoing. I think that the piece that I am most optimistic about is being able to transition the policy to a point where we're embedding it in every single interaction. That is an area where obviously we collectively, and I include myself, have fallen short. And this is an area where again, we can create policy all day, and certainly we have. But that's not good enough. And so when you do compliance, it's about making sure that we've got the data to back it up, we've got the follow-up, we've got a public, transparent process where we're showing all of our work, and we can count on the policy changes made actually being followed.
Chief, this is kind of a two-part question. Jonah Kaplan with WCCO. How many current openings are there on the Minneapolis Police Department?
The budgeted number is as per charter, which is 731. As my math isn't that good off the top of my head, we're somewhere around 580, so whatever is the difference.
So that's a significant number. What does recruitment look like from here? Because the mayor's alluded to it, the commissioners alluded to it. This puts pressure already on a police department that for better or worse, is fighting a perception of negativity. So what does recruitment look like from here, and how do you solve that problem with this?
We've already seen an increase in applications to the agency, and we've already had a number of inquiries from people who previously worked here inquiring about coming back. So there already has been some change, some better feelings around policing in the city, and I know the mayor and the commissioner are working on a plan to further incentivize to open that up, as well as we've been working with the state legislature to create some additional pathways in hopes of bringing more folks from the city into the police department to make it a little bit easier for people from city with different experiences to become police officers.
And sorry for more math questions, but for the mayor and maybe even for the council president, what you've all been alluded to about now the financial commitment to this. How much is it going to cost the city and taxpayers to enforce and comply with this agreement? What kind of investment does it take?
I can't give you the exact dollar figure on how much investment this is going to take. Obviously, over many years, which inevitably this agreement will be in place for, it'll be in the tens of millions. If you look at other cities, a huge portion of the cost comes in the form of IT investments, data information and sharing investments, and I think one of the most critical pieces is an early intervention system. You know, I'm going to get a little bit technical here. It's not like, you know, given the scope of the issue and what we need to do to improve, it's not like you're just going to be able to buy one of these things off the shelf like a Microsoft Word. You know, you got to be able to make sure that it's tailored to the unique needs of what we're seeing and also the specifics that are within the agreement itself. And I'll tell you, it's going to take time. This is one of the most important pieces that we're going to be working on, and that's just limited to the IT. On top of that, there are personnel additions that will inevitably need to be made to make sure that, for instance, supervisors are also supervised. We're going to need to make sure that training investments are made to make sure that the field training officers and the supervisors themselves are trained in on best practices and then are evaluated to make sure that those best practices are being followed. Long story short, this is no small undertaking here. There will be significant investments. Can I give the exact dollar figure now? No, I can't. But certainly you can look to other cities to see the general expense.
How much money this year and next year? Is there money already in budgets for improvements on this?
As part of my budget proposed for 2023 that we allocated in 2022, I believe there was about $2 million that was set aside for the initial investments. I am not confident that that will be enough. If we need more, certainly we will make those allocations.
But there's only so much money to go around, so I guess what should residents and taxpayers be prepared for in terms of tough choices that you and the council are going to have to make?
I'm a mayor, and as mayor, you deal in the business of reality. The reality is that we will have tough choices to make. The benefit of this agreement is many of those choices are already made. These are commitments that we have made. These are goals that we have committed to, and I think we need to get the job done. Yes, please. Please correct me if I get any of those dollar figures wrong.
You got it right. Thanks. I'm Amelia Kruger, Budget Director. So as we plan to meet the goals of the settlement agreement, we will be leveraging existing assets as well as asking for additional funding. So as the mayor just talked about in the biennial budget that was passed in December, there was around $8 million of funding to expand personnel in the city attorney's office, personnel in the IT department, as well as increased funding for alternatives to policing programs and violence prevention programs. So that money is already in the budget. We also have an additional $2 million, as the mayor discussed, to handle any needs that come up between now and the next budget process that are urgent and related to fulfilling the goals of the settlement agreement. So that's the plan we have in place.
Commissioner, you talked about the impact of a court and how that kind of adds the teeth. If there is a dispute, I imagine, or the inspector finds something wrong, this is when you would file a motion that maybe the city would be held in contempt of court. How does the process work in terms of enforcing this? And what does that mean? Are there monetary penalties? How does it work?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I just want to start real quick by mentioning that discriminatory policing is incredibly expensive for the city. Not only does it cost us many millions of dollars in settlements, it literally costs people their lives. And it messes with the legitimacy, trust, and cooperation that's needed for success for our city. So discrimination is expensive, and that's what we need to end. When it comes to what's next here, I want to be really clear that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights will be on the ground with the city and MPD through the entire process to make sure that we are looking at everything ourselves, that we are working with them and helping where we can on policies. We will attend every single training. We are there to make sure that they can be set up for success. This whole process is about success for the city. We are better when the city is successful, and that's why the independent evaluators are experts to provide that technical support. That is why we're doing that. And yes, if there are disputes, we will first work that out. It could go to the court, but that's not what this is designed to do. This is designed to move forward. We recognize it'll take time. That is why there's clear deadlines, clear framework, clear prioritization, because all of this stuff has to be done holistically.
Where does your expertise come on the policing side of things? Like putting you inside with, chasing down these juvenile carjackers. How does that help? I don't mean to say it so crudely. I'm just curious, what is your policing expertise to sit in and know sort of the policing side? I get the human rights side, and I get the human treatment side. I'm just wondering more on the policing side.
I just wasn't sure if you were suggesting that we were in a car at that point. So we are.
You said you're there.
Yeah, right? On the ground, reviewing policies, reviewing, and so just want to clarify that point real quick. So we do have pretty extensive policing experts that work with us every single day. So we mentioned already 21 CP policing. Those are experts from around the country, many of them former chiefs. They are very respected, who are work with us all the time to make sure that we're getting this correct.
Question for the city. I am wondering, what is being done to ensure the evaluator is independent of the city and the DHR, especially since the evaluator will be hired by the city?
So there is a actually very exhaustive process on selection of the independent evaluator baked into the settlement agreement itself. So it is true that the independent evaluator will be on contract with the city. It's a mechanism for paying the independent evaluator. That's got to happen somehow. But the entire settlement agreement maps out, what the requirements are for the RFP, what the qualification requirements are for the independent evaluator, and MDHR and the city will come together. We will review all of the responses from the applicants and come together with a list of 3 finalists, which then part of the RFP requires them to actually go out into community and give public presentations in at least 2 places in the city so that we can get some feedback from the community about the selections that we're making. And then based on all of that, MDHR and the city will come together and make a decision jointly on the independent evaluator. There is a provision in the settlement agreement that if for some reason we can't agree, we're going to choose lots and do strikes. I don't think it's going to come to that. We know that there are entities, firms out there that do this work and do this work very, very well. We've got patterns across the country of independent evaluator, and it's not going to be one individual. It's going to be likely a firm with many different individuals. So, I mean, all of these things are mapped out in the settlement agreement.
We have time for 2 more questions. Question for the Department of Human Rights. Does implementing the terms of the settlement agreement require additional state resources, and has the legislature been keen to allocating those resources this session?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, legislative session is obviously in full force. The governor put forth a transformational budget change for the Department of Human Rights in alignment with what the governor and lieutenant governor have recommended for the previous years. And we will use that to do our work however makes sense. So that is both in the Senate bill and in the House bill. And that's just the regular budget request that we've been making for the past many years. This is just part of our overall enforcement action.
Chief, does anything change with the disciplinary coaching component that had kind of become controversial in the community?
No, the disciplinary matrix remains in effect since its last revision, which ensures that only a specific types, the lowest levels of infraction, are eligible for coaching. But beyond that, no.
What might be helpful to clarify, I'll just echo that, and just provide the clarity that it is not appropriate to coach on anything that is police misconduct. And so under this agreement, you can no longer do so. And the chief is referencing some changes that have been made and making sure that that continues to occur. There's nothing wrong with coaching per se. What's wrong is when misconduct that should not be used for coaching is used in that way. So this agreement eliminates that. And it also does require a redo to the discipline matrix and a reset.